Caren and I were employed by ABC News for many, many years. And I was a correspondent on television, and Caren was a producer behind the scenes. And when her son was diagnosed with autism in 1997, two things she did is she took a step back from her career because she needed to care for him, and she switched from being on the fast track to super duper higher management to a job share so that she would have the time to work with her and help her son. But the other thing she did on the days that she was working was she devoted herself to telling stories about people on the autism spectrum. And back in the 90s, there were very few pieces in the news about this, and also it was a hard sell to get editors to even want to report on autism because they kind of never heard of it. And she asked me to be her partner in doing this work because I have a brother-in-law with autism. Donald's name was mentioned, just his first name was mentioned in an article written that really first introduced autism to the world as a concept in 1943.
At the time, autism wasn't even a word.
And the first case he wrote about, and the one he wrote about in way more detail than the others, was Donald T, last name T, called him Case One, literally Case One. So we said we would love to find Case One. And so through some detective work, we were able to locate Donald T and found out his last name was Triplett, and then he lived in a town called Forest, Mississippi, which is a small town in the center of the state of Mississippi, and that he was still there.
And like the fourth or fifth call, an answering machine picked up and said, hello, happy spring, and have a wonderful fall, and, a spectacular 2007. And, just by the tone of his voice and everything about him, I knew that was Donald.
Hey, Shelby Welby. Hey, Nat the cat.
Well, hi, Don, darling.
Hey, Chandler the plant.
But there's a saying in the autism world, which everybody has heard if you are in the autism world, and that saying is, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, because everybody is just, as all of us are as individuals, just so different. But what happened in the late 80s was suddenly everybody had heard of autism because they heard of Rain Man and they'd seen Dustin Hoffman. And so the general public kind of assumed, I might have also been guilty of this at that time, that's what autism looked like in everybody, that everything that Dustin Hoffman's character did, that's what autism was about. And so, as we point out in the movie, there's a famous scene in the movie where he accurately counts a whole bunch of toothpicks that are dropped on the floor. And when we were writing the book, we met parents of people who were raising kids in that era. And once the movie came out, they said it became like a regular feature when at family gatherings with extended family or cocktail parties, when they brought up that their kid had autism, they went, oh, can he do the card counting? Have you brought him to Las Vegas to do the card counting? And can he do the toothpick counting? And it wasn't ill-intentioned. It's just that nobody knew any better. Now there are quite a few portrayals in fiction, particularly in television and some movies, of people on the spectrum. Those people on the spectrum all are different from one another, but they're all similar in the sense that they all have careers and they have social challenges without question, but they're all kind of portrayed as geniuses. There's one who's a legal genius on Boston Legal. There's a medical genius on The Good Doctor. There's a police detective forensic genius on The Bridge. And there are these characters who are going to school and driving cars and having careers and having love lives. And they all do completely have social challenges. But what's now left out of the story is that that's not what autism looks like in everybody also. And that there's a whole group of people for whom autism is profoundly challenging and life limiting, profoundly. And their stories are now not told because of this other portrayal. And so we wanted to make the case in the film that autism is a very, very, very big spectrum.
Caren, you say that Mickey your son teaches you something about how to deal with him, and that parents really have to listen and watch and react a certain way. Can you talk a little bit about that?
You have to really just kind of feel it out in a different way. It's like the whole scene with the cat. I knew, Mickey talked about cats 24/7. And I thought it was a great idea, let him have some company in his life, so it became my idea because he meowed all the time. I mean, it made complete sense to me that would be something that would make him happy. except that it wasn't. It was, his version of, cats were more of a way to connect to people, not to have a live animal that he would care for. So it was just, we totally missed on that. And so, and I still miss a lot.
I love the way he thinks. And I'm sure that there are times when it's very frustrating for you because you can't quite zero in on what he's getting at. Is that something that you've learned to deal with over the years?
Yes and no. I don't always get it. You have to listen really carefully. And sometimes it's just that he has all these things in his brain that he wants to talk about. It's not just the periodic tables that you saw in the film, it's many other things. And even within the periodic tables and all the connections you make, I was just with him recently, and he delved into what each element actually did and how it was connected and who it was named after and why it was named after them. And it was a whole new series of, so I learned a lot on that walk, because there's more and more and more stuff in there that I just, or we'll have a conversation and he'll have something in his head that in a million years, I wouldn't know about, but it's deeply planted there that he read somewhere or saw somewhere. And so, listening is key, but sometimes, you have to, it's work to get inside.
It never occurred to me, not being in the community, so much racism surrounding the perception of autism. Can you speak to that?
But back in the 50s and more in the 60s and the 70s, when autism finally began to be more formally studied, the people who did the initial studies kind of leaned towards the idea that children on the spectrum were born to parents who were really super bright, and the evidence was that they were very successful in their careers and they had PhDs. So why that was happening is those were the people who were able to get their kids to a psychiatrist. But the psychiatrist looked at the body of evidence, and it was all white children with really super smart, super educated, very often super successful parents. And so that kind of flipped into this narrative that you had to be white and super smart to have a child with autism, and that ruled out African American people of color in general, because the attitudes at the time were that, well, only white people are going to be super smart. In most cases, are going to be super smart. And so kids of color had a very, very difficult time getting diagnosed.
Go, go, go.
In my research study, every Black family that I've met with has asked a similar question. How do we keep our children safe? How do we fix this situation so that our children won't die?
When the book first came out, we were at we were doing a talk in a library outside of Chicago. And there was a woman of color who stood up and said, how many people in your book are Black? And, our answer was 1. And that's because historically, that's where the research went. And it was a light bulb for John and I, who had covered autism for over 20 years. And we had done stories about girls with autism and how siblings of autism were affected, and just all of these different issues. But we realized we were guilty of never having done a story on people of color with autism. And we went out to change that right away. And in doing so, we saw, the research, which was how often people of color are either underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed, because to this day, doctors and psychiatrists don't first think of autism as something that a person of color will have.
The film is, yes, it's heartwarming, and yes, it's difficult at times, but there's also great humor in this film, especially
Yes.
The customer survey, the customer survey card for sex, for post-sex. I love that scene.
The naughty Audie.
Yeah, that's Amy Gravino. We're so delighted that she took part in the movie, and she's become a really good friend of ours. So Amy Gravino is a woman with autism who was diagnosed as when she was, I think she said 11. And I'm not sure how old she is now. I'm not going to even guess, because it wouldn't be polite, but she's not a child anymore. She's not a teenager anymore, and she's been out in the world for some time, and she makes a living counseling people on the spectrum about issues around sexuality. And she does a talk, and she shares her personal experience. She's very, very open about her personal experience and her own challenges. And she was trying to talk about how when she first began to have an intimate life, she had to sort of figure things out, and she was kind of coming at it in a very cerebral way. Even though she's actually a very passionate person, she was coming at it in a very cerebral way. And she said that after the first time she had sex with somebody, the next morning she had written up, she wanted to know how it had gone from his point of view, and she found the easiest way was to have him fill out like a questionnaire that she prepared from a sex comment card. And so I had a whole list of questions with options and things like that, like, did you enjoy my outfit, how do you rate the sounds I made, 1 to 5, and things like that. So Amy tells that story really, she plays it for laughs, and we use it in the movie that way as well.